Good evening. I'd like to welcome everyone on behalf of the Finance Committee. I want to open a public hearing this evening on our sustainable growth rate of taxes. We have a very intimate crowd. If you want to move closer to the front, I'd appreciate it. We do have a recording going on, and it is also being broadcast this evening, so please be aware of that. And yes, I'm doing the. Okay, they're going to try to help me there. The town is thinking of different ways to mute some of the echo that the room provides us. So we're going to do our best here. Okay. I'm Dean Banfield. I'm this year's chair of the Finance Committee. I'm going to help get our conversation started this evening with just a few brief remarks, a few slides to sort of set the context of what we're about here, and then I'm going to open it up to public comment. Next slide, please, Carrie. Okay, just some quick notes. We have a group here who I think if the moderator were to canvass them, they would be good candidates for the Finance Committee. So I'm not sure I need to really describe what the Finance Committee is in great detail. But I will say, as you can see right around the table, we are a large committee. We are the largest standing committee in the town. There are 15 members. And we have a variety of interests and experience drawn from the breadth of constituencies within the town. Our members are appointed. We are not elected officials. And as a result of that context, we don't really have any budgetary authority. We don't set policy. We are strictly an advisory body. So we are the primary financial advisor to town meeting. That is our main mission, is to make recommendations on warrant articles of financial or real property interest that appear on the town meeting warrant each year. So that's the primary thing that we do. But the real bulk of the work that we do is in the second bullet here, and that's that we consult on operating budget formation with the budgeting entities, the town manager's budgets, the school budgets, including CCRSD, and a light touch on Minuteman Tech. We issue guidelines for these operating budgets, and that happens early in the budgeting cycle and gives each of those entities an opportunity to react to our advice and set their budgets according to their needs and priorities. Back one. And in the last bullet, the other thing that we are mandated to do, and this was created through a citizens petition article that was on the floor of town meeting in 2011, and that is that we are to make a 5-year projection for the community of our expectation of the band that taxes might fall in over the next 5 years. So those are the things that we do. I want to focus a little bit on that central bullet which we have, which is our consultation on budgeting. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So we have an annual cycle of meetings where we meet with the superintendent and the town manager. We do a preliminary review of budget priorities. We set what's called a preliminary guideline, and then we have a secondary meeting with the manager and the superintendent, and then we issue a final budget guideline for the operating budgets of those budgeting concerns. We do look at the annual town survey to keep our eyes focused on what the priorities for the town are, if those are shifting. And I will say that the top 3 priorities for the town are nearly chiseled in stone. They are schools, they are preserving the character of the community, and they are taxes. And below that, there is some movement, but the top 3 are traditionally, and in my history of living in the town, they've always been those top 3: schools, preserving the character of the community, and taxes. In addition, the process of doing budget development and consultation, we look at external economic factors. And this is where we need to really take a look. We look at macro trends, we look at local housing costs, and these are things that influence the way in which we set our guideline during this budgeting consultation. Can we go to the next slide, please? This is a chart that we struggle with. Every year we take a look at this chart, it gives us a lot of concern. We've wrestled with this chart for every year that I've been a member. It was introduced by a former Finance Committee member. I served with him for a few years, and then he cycled off the committee. His name was Scott Randall, and we affectionately call this chart the Randall Curve because he would put it on the table every year and force us to look at it and talk about it. The cluster of lines around the lower slope of growth that you see over here are basic economic trends. Consumer price index, the look at future inflation, which is the 10-year Treasury note, a chart of what's that? That's cost of labor, and the lower purple bar that kind of eventually trends back up, that is the median house value in the town of Concord. And those are trending up between 25 and 30% over the course of this 10-year chart. But the larger problem that we see, and that we struggle with each year, is that the orange line is the rate of growth of our taxes. Our taxes have risen 50% over the course of that same interval. And that's something that we have to, work with. This gives us a palpable sense of discomfort. And is it really the case that the town is somehow marching to a completely independent drummer, immune from the realities in which it exists? We're not sure. Go to the next slide, please. We also have been looking recently, over the last few years, at the increasing emphasis that the community is placing on housing and affordable housing. Housing stress is something that has been, sort of placed on the table, and we're closely apprised of that. 1 in 5 households, housing stress is defined as spending more than, by the federal government, by the Housing and Urban Development, as more than 30% of your household income spent on housing costs, and that's an all-in number. That's not only your mortgage, but it's also your insurance and your utilities and all the things that go into, really running your house. 1 in 5 households in Concord are at or below 50% of the median area income. So that's something of a concern when taxes are rising, right, somewhat dramatically. But more concerning is that 1 in 5 households that are at or below the median area income are exhibiting housing stress. So, this is a concern that will potentially, over the long haul, start to modify the character of the community, because it's going to put people who can't continue to live here in a position of having to possibly move out. Next slide, please. So this is, as I mentioned, and I'm just going to flip through this quickly, these are the top 3 priorities of the town. Every year, schools are on the top, preserving the character of the community, and taxes are third. But this chart shows that there's a divergence of interest in these things, and it's quite predictable. The minute that your child is no longer in school, your emphasis on how important schools are somehow drops off the table. That is probably pretty predictable. But nonetheless, schools remain, in aggregate, the highest priority for the community. Next slide. So what is a sustainable growth rate? What is this initiative that the FinCom is trying to undertake here? The committee feels that this initiative is completely consistent with the general mandate to act as a financial advisor to the town meeting. Next slide. Stepping back for just a minute, recall that the primary responsibility of the FinCom, one of our primary responsibilities, is to produce a 5-year tax estimate. And this is the estimate that was produced in the last Finance Committee report that was issued at town meeting last year. The tax rates going forward are somewhat significant. To have tax rates, trending in the 4 to 4.5% range over the long haul is not necessarily a sustainable thing. We're very concerned about that, and these do not include any projection for the debt service that will be incurred if we build a new middle school. And we are currently tracking to open a new middle school in the 22-23 school year. Either at the end or in the middle of that school year, there's a projection that we will be actually opening a school. So we will be incurring debt leading into that in the 21-22 timeframe. We will start to incur significant debt in order to pay for that, and that's not even included in these projections. So, blending our responsibility to advise town meeting, our consultation on budget development, and our mandate to do these 5-year projections, it seems like a natural thing for us to take a 5-year view of what the 5-year rate of taxation ought to be in our view. So that's where the sustainable growth rate idea kind of percolates from. Next slide, please. So what is a sustainable rate? Well, we had an original idea, and I dug this out of the minutes. It's a one-sentence idea. The original idea that was recorded in the minutes was a rate which allows Concord to maintain the best town government and schools that we can afford. Now that pretty much captures it, I think. Now that pretty much captures it. I think that's a good idea of a sustainable tax rate, one that gives us the best we can get for what we can pay. But this is what we've actually come up with, and we voted on this and adopted it in June of 2018. You can read it. I'll read it along with me. A rate which maintains the town's economic soundness, financial strength, and flexibility through keeping a level of excess levy limit capacity so that general overrides are not necessary, maintaining a free cash balance, continual investment in ongoing capital needs, and in avoiding burdening taxpayers but not beyond normal expectations of income growth, and allowing the town to maintain its character without undermining the diversity of our population. This exact language was incorporated into the comprehensive long-range plan. The point here is that our fiscal policies must be measured by their alignment with our non-financial priorities to the maximum degree possible. Next slide, please. So looking at the long-range plan, Concord is dedicated, first, you're gonna have to hit a few here. I thought I'd be controlling this. Concord is dedicated to making aging in place a real possibility. This goal must be supported by a number of initiatives, and they are not all financial initiatives. We need to provide places that are acceptable for older people to live and live out their lives here in the town. Next, you banged right along. That's fine. We need to attend to in a planful manner to the capital needs of the town, and we need to have operating budgets that deliver on the needs of the community in an efficient and equitable way. This is the language that appears within the comprehensive long-range plan. In addition to these goals, the long-range plan also advised for a 10-year financial projection program building on bottom-up departmental planning and capital needs management. We are not trying to usurp that particular function. The seeds of that recommendation are germinating now. They are in the Capital Planning Task Force. Next slide, please. So what is the practical way in which this is going to be used? Really, it's a 5-year forward advice. It's consistent with the long-range planning, and it's helpful in supporting multi-year engagements. It might be a collective bargaining engagement, it might be a lease, or it might be a service contract, something where a vendor requires you to sign up for multiple years of something. It might be a curriculum purchase that shows up on children's laptops at school, and you buy a 5-year subscription to it. Well, if you're making a 5-year buy, you might want to think about what is that costing me over 5 years. So this is hopefully going to support the kinds of things that the town and the schools engage in and that involve multi-year agreements. Next slide, please. Okay, here's another one where we got some bullets, so just hang on for a second. In the first year of the process, we will publish a 5-year forward rate each year as of July 30th, next bullet, and we will provide that guidance during our budget consultation process with the budgeting entity. So we'll send a copy of that rate to the town manager and to the superintendent saying, as you do your budget formation, this is the rate that the finance committee is recommending. Next bullet. And then it will be used during the guideline setting discussions, and we're already starting that. Our preliminary guideline discussions this year included the use of the forward rate that we set last July to help us think about. It didn't necessarily, get us to a number, but it certainly was an input in our process of setting the preliminary guideline, and it will be used again in setting the final guideline. And lastly, rinse, lather, repeat. We're just going to do this every year. We expect to reassess this every year. We're early in this process. We fully anticipate that there's going to be some, change as we go forward, as we sort of settle into this methodology and how we do it, and et cetera. Next slide. So the rate this year we've set last July at 2.16%. Which is in line with both inflation trends and with the expectation of low future inflation. We have been in a remarkable few years of very low inflation. In future years, this is, and the line you see there is 2.16, and look at how much below what the projected taxes are. We've been in a remarkable few years of very low inflation. In future years, we anticipate that the SGR may in fact will in fact be responsive to inflationary trends. It may have to be higher than the Prop 2.5 limits. That's okay. If that's what it takes to sustain the town, then we'll advise through this rate that we have overrides. We hope that doesn't happen, but we're certainly not going to ignore the fact that we may be in a future inflationary environment. It's certainly possible that that may be the case. So given the significant variance between what we see here as the projection and what we would like to see as our forward advisory rate, in our current consultation process with budgeting and doing our guidelines, our preliminary guideline conversation had us think about getting us down to this line over the next 3 years. So if you can show one more slide, it'll show how that would work. And so it slopes down to get us there. And this year we've set the initial preliminary guideline at 3.25%, which is below any of the lines you see there. So we're trying to nudge our town down to our rate, and that's the guideline we've set for this year. For the preliminary guideline that we've set for this year is about a 3.25% raise. So, next slide is just questions and comments. I'm done with my presentation.
Hello?
It's on.
There we go. I'm Julie Rowine from 1404 Main Street, and I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of Concord Carlisle, and I'm here tonight to speak for our league.
Welcome.
We approved this letter at our board meeting yesterday, addressed to Mr. Banfield as chair of the Finance Committee. Dear Mr. Banfield, last spring at Concord Town Meeting 2019, the League of Women Voters of Concord Carlisle urged, quote, the town and schools to establish in 2019 a collaborative and comprehensive fiscal planning process for long-term capital spending to study needs, costs, and financially prudent timing for large projects currently foreseen while considering the impact and tax burdens on all town citizens. Decisions as to if, how, and when projects should be done must balance meeting the needs of the community against the long-term financial capacity of the community. The League is pleased that the Select Board has established a capital planning task force to examine ways in which the town and schools might integrate their planning for capital projects subject to debt exclusion votes. This is an important step forward. Determining what level of financial resources the community can sustain over time is another vital piece of the puzzle. We encourage you to listen carefully to citizens of all ages and incomes as you actively solicit input about financial sustainability for all Concord residents during your hearing on the sustainable growth rate. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
Hi, Carlin Reed, 83 Wits End. Speaking for myself, I'm got a question about one of the slides that you had put up there. You talked about using the sustainable growth rate to help with multi-year commitments. So the question I have is, how will you measure the success rate or the compliance rate of the multi-year commitments to the sustainable growth rate? How are you going to tell if your SGR is doing any good?
I'll open that up to the committee. Anybody would like to take a crack at that? Our goal, just to give you my opinion, and I can't speak for the rest of my 15-member committee. Everyone has their own voice. Our goal is to just give some heft in making those types of longer-term commitments to those who are in charge of doing the negotiating. If they see coming over their shoulder that the community is suggesting that this is an advisable rate, it will give them a little bit more, it'll stiffen their spine a little bit within the context of any kind of back and forth in which, we're being pushed. So that's the best we can offer, is that we are an advisory body, and this is our advice. We only have the bully pulpit. It's all we possess. And we don't have, as I said at the very outset of the meeting, we don't have any policy authority or any budgetary, we can't pull any budgetary strings to contain these things. So it's our attempt to advise. So that's my best answer. Anybody else want to add to that?
I'll add to that. That was what Dean said is correct. Is this on? Well,
Yep.
I'll sit closer. Okay. I think the guideline process is our main way of finding out if the guidelines that we've issued the previous year are in fact being followed. Because when people come to us the next year with their budget requests, we really take not a really deep dive, but we take a closer look at what are the drivers behind some of those numbers. And a lot of the drivers are contractual. And so we can find out, is this helping the budgeting entities develop contracts that are able to constrict spending within the guideline? So I think the guideline process helps us see, are we getting the longer range and the bigger pieces of the budget within a guideline?
Oh, thank you. Look at that.
I'm Terry Rothwell, 330 Muskegon Road. As you say, the town is made of different points of view. And I have one that's quite different from the thrust of this presentation tonight. The Finance Committee is not only the largest committee mentioned in our charter, but is supposed to be the most diverse. It's supposed to represent the community as a whole. That means that views like mine and views like yours as presented in the SGR are to be both considered. I remember looking at Guideline Committee reports of about 10 years ago on an issue I was studying. In all of those meetings of the Guidelines Committee, there was disagreement. There were votes, 8-5, 6-2 in building your guideline process. I can believe that it's time to make a change in how we do our guidelines, but I think that makes this a very important stage in our use of financial guidance to the town. If we're going to present a new approach, sustainable growth rate, developed in a paragraph or two in the long-range plan, we need to make sure that it works, that it does not cut the legs out from under us. I have a suggestion for the index, and I'm sorry to hear you're still working with CPI and the inflation rate as the basis upon which town government finance should be based. There's a magazine called American City and County. They publish an index. That index is made of 4 parts. One part is the CPI. It's the lowest index of the 4 that they use in considering the cost of running a municipality. Go look at it. Consider it. Get us a better measure than CPI. Housing stress. A lot of us spend a lot of time on housing stress. And you're looking to help the people that have housing stress through this means. I don't think you can forget that for 10 years we've had a senior tax fund for private individuals that helps taxpayers who can't afford to quite live it up. And within the last couple of years, we've had a program that allows seniors and others to apply for exemptions from their taxes. Now, why do we get any credit for what we've done? I've been involved in those. Are we getting any credit for doing something for housing stress in those 2 measures? And is some of the pressure already taken off? And why do we need this on top? Top 3 town priorities. I think the last priority survey had one other factor that was there, finance, and that was housing. And housing is probably part of the town character factor as well. So please don't forget the rising interest in housing in this town. I think in your late October meeting, I saw how you're going to apply ESG, at least this year. And I urge you to work on it, to vet it, to improve it, if this is a new step we're taking. Don't throw it out there to look bad the first time. I don't know how many years we've had a budget increase of only 2.1%. And you're shooting for that for the next 5 years? And trying to get there partly in the next year? I'm worried about that. As much as you're worried about other things, I'm worried about what that kind of guideline does to our community. This is a community of many different views, not just that of the Finance Committee. But the Finance Committee has a major role in this town. As you say, to guide us, to remind us that we can't overspend, to put our nose against it when we try to overspend. That's what the Finance Committee can do. And it doesn't have to wait for a town meeting to do it. And you're doing it right now. Sustainable tax rate. I guess what I heard the other night was 2.1 is the target for 5 years. We're going to get there gradually from what it was, what the guideline was last year. And divide it by 5. And that's how you got to your final recommendation. That wasn't not terribly impressive finish for your development of a guideline. The original Randall curve is C. So we call the rate of inflation. It's a simple answer to a very complex task of running a municipality. I find difficulty in seeing the relationship. And while you look for other indices and so forth, you still come back to that. And I recommend a subscription to American City account. And to explore, now what's happened though is, you have been doing what we've always done, which is compare our rate of increase in Concord to other towns in our neighboring area. And that didn't satisfy it, because we were in balance. We were not out of balance. You want lower taxes. That's the view of many people in town, and it's also not the view of others. I'm sorry to give a speech, but as you know, I feel very strongly about this and about your role in our town. We've just had a charter review. No one recommended that there be a stronger finance committee role in that charter review. And you still have an important job, by my experience. And I've only been here 50 years. So thank you for bearing up with my remarks. If you think there's passion in that, it's true.
Thank you. I do have a few additional slides that are sort of stuck at the end there, Carrie. If you can find them, they're click down and find them under hidden. Let me see if I can go find them. So I want to see what you would say local perspectives. This one, we do not have enough data because the American Community Survey, which is provided by the U.S. Census, is it only goes back to 2011, but they are providing this data going forward. And this is a record of literally Concord median household income. This is not growing by leaps and bounds. So taxes which are rising at, strong 3.5% and 4.5% are not supported by the income growth that is being experienced within the town. So that's just our observation there. I didn't have enough data here to put that on the 10-year chart, but it would not map favorably on that chart. If you can back up one, there's a chart of house there. This chart here is just two statistics. This is household median household house value, and then tax bill, your tax bill. So the taxes are the blue line, and the growth of your home's value, the median home value, are the green bars. And taxes are, again, outstripping any growth that people are experiencing in the major investment in their lives, which is their home. So we're just trying to be reasonable here. And these are statistics that we struggle with. We struggle with the fact that these lines continue to outstrip any measure of what we can see as the community's basic capacity. That's where we are. So. Sir.
Mike Wilson, 1695 Railroad Road. I had my number of these, speaking just for myself.
Okay. Let's take it as a sign.
First, thanks for your work of trying to address it. It's a difficult problem. We have a lot of issues. Most of them are not very controversial.
You have your share.
Everything is
before you is controversial in the sense that you have to balance the needs of the community for the town and the schools with our willingness to pay. And that is essentially what you do. In my view, there's no index and no statistic that can substitute for 15 citizens in the town using their good judgment, evaluating budgets and taxes, and coming to a judgment about a guideline. I was on the finance committee for 6 years. It's not a lot of fun sometimes, but that is the essence of your task. And I would encourage you, as you mentioned, we have a very large finance committee. That's on purpose. You're not representatives, but you represent the town. And it's that task of balancing the needs of the community and the willingness to pay that is the essence of your responsibility. With respect to a number of the slides that you put up, and let's just go with this one. It is the median home value. Is it the median tax bill?
It is.
Or the median
It is the median tax bill. The median tax bill and the median home value.
In your revised reports of 2018,
Switch out your mic. This one seems like it's a lot quieter.
Maybe it'll be smarter too, right? Okay. Carrie, are you in charge of the slides? I don't know what slide it was, Dean, but it was a slide that sort of laid out remarks early on in your presentation. There. Nope, you have it. I note that in this fine set of remarks, but in the third to the last sentence, avoiding burdening taxpayers beyond normal expectations of income growth. Right? If you went from median to mean income growth and mapped that onto your chart, I wonder what it would look like. So my notion is, not notion, but people in town pay their tax bills out of earned income.
Right.
And if you are going to use some kind of index to try to help yourselves resolve your annual dilemma of setting a guideline, I would suggest that you look at some relationship between median or mean family income and median and mean tax burden, rather than some constructed index of bonds and CPIs, because that's really relevant to the town, because that's how we pay our tax. At least most of us pay our taxes out of earned income. So I would urge you to think carefully about the index that you've constructed. I'm not sure what it really says. And second, I would encourage you to rely more on your good collective judgment about trying to balance the needs of the towns and the schools with the willingness and the ability of the town to pay for them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cynthia Wood, 362 Bedford Street. I have only started getting interested in this in the last year, and I read what was in the Finance Committee report last year and had a very difficult time understanding it. And I served on the Finance Committee for 6 years, admittedly a while ago. And I think that an important role that you have in all of this is to make what you're doing understandable and transparent to the population. I'm troubled by graphs that don't have either of the axes labeled, or graphs where there are two different data sets shown on it and with completely different numbers attached to them, so that the lines and the bars don't really correspond to the same scale on the axes. I just think that if you want to you need to explain to the public what you're doing. And the tables and graphs that were in last year's Finance Committee report, and I've mulled them over, and I've tried doing various calculations, and it is really hard for me to understand what the thinking is behind these graphs. So I would really encourage as you go forward with this process, to spend a lot of time on making sure that your presentations to the public are really clear and that your graphs are not misleading.
Thank you. Just as a question for you, are there any of the graphs here that you would like a little more detailed description of because you didn't understand it when it was put up here? I'd be happy to describe the axes and the way these particular graphs that I used this evening we're trying to represent the information that we're trying to show.
Well, I didn't have enough time to analyze them, and what's in the packet that we picked up is too small to read, so I don't really have a chance to figure out what I don't understand yet.
Okay.
But
We'll get this presentation on the Finance Committee page, and you'll be able to
I think
get
it would be
there.
helpful to have somebody who's maybe not on the Finance Committee and is not deeply involved in it take a look at what you're doing and make sure that you're conveying the message that you hope to.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening, Dory Keogh, 51 MacArthur Road. And in my 50 years in Concord, I think I've never seen such a disparity of income between age groups. And one of the things that I'm concerned about is following a little bit of what Terry was saying, that there is a great disparity among what people have in the older population from what many of our young, I'm using the word young in a relative sense, 50-ish people are earning for incomes. And so last year at town meeting, I talked a little bit about wants and needs. And I think that what's a want for somebody is a need for others. And maybe trying to make that clear to people, and what we're trying to do is balance that. And we're balancing it between disparate groups. And an example that comes to my mind is White Pond. That for many years, that was a private group, and it was maintained by the dues that people paid, I being one of them. And it was doable. Now that we've taken it on, which was not part of a long plan, it was something that came up, a great opportunity to do, or people thought it was a great opportunity, and now each year it's more and more money to White Pond. So I consider that to be a want. Some of the things in the town, like maybe a new fire station, those are needs. And I think if we can start to balance things, not just in dollars and cents, but what makes a community run, it would be helpful to us, because as people are trying to balance, as you see, a higher and higher percentage of incomes, of tax percentage of incomes, and this is for many of us who are older and we're not on fixed incomes, but we're not earning at earning capacity, and we're trying to keep people in town, which is so difficult with not, as Terry mentioned, housing stock for people who would like to live in Concord. You all know people who moved out of town this past year or two. They couldn't find a smaller house in Concord. We want to be able to do that. We also want, but we've got to have a balance of older people and younger people, and trying being fair and looking at for all. So I think that, I don't mean that you have to market what you're doing, but just to follow a little bit of what Cynthia said, most of us don't speak the math language. And remember, this is something about the worst part of 6th grade, was learning about all of this. And so for you, it's a natural for many of you. If it weren't, you wouldn't be volunteering to be on the Finance Committee. So have a little understanding for those of us who struggle to get through algebra and geometry and said, the heck with it, after that, I'm done. And to have to face this and know it really affects me. So if in plain English, in dollars and cents, and really keeping in mind the wants and needs. And I also want to really echo what Julie said about that we are pleased that there is this capital planning task force. I hope it will look around at other towns and see what's being done at other towns. And I hope that they will work with you well, because they'll all be working for the same goal. And I join Mike in thanking you for all that you do in this. And I think you're trying to make this understandable, which is really a gift to us all. And we have to do our share, but trying to think of how you balance it and maybe help people to understand what really is needed in order to do this. It's not just numbers, it's choices. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Town manager.
Hi, good evening. I'm Town Manager Stephen Crane, and I want to just thank the Finance Committee for the work that they've put into the presentation and the work to do the analysis and the taxes. I feel you on the charts. I remember as a town manager, I present the budget and other information at meetings using charts, and it sometimes is a challenge. I think one of the things I will, in defense of trying to use charts to tell a story, is if you came here and presented and just said the taxes are going up too fast, how would you be able to show, well, what does that mean compared to what, for who? And so I appreciate the effort to kind of show that graphically for people, for all of us, and even though it may be a challenge to kind of chart that in a way that speaks to everybody, or even you make choices on indices and things like that. The only comment I had, and I think I've said this to you before, Dean, I think it's fairer to show the operating budget and the debt exclusion budget as two separate lines on the chart as opposed to the tax bill. Because I think what you're going to find is the operating budget and the CPI, and I somewhat agree that the national basket of goods is not necessarily a true snapshot of what costs for a municipality,
Right.
but it's not terrible either.
Right.
I think the operating budget and the CPI will probably mirror each other fairly closely, and then the debt exclusion line would be significantly more steep. I know that would be helpful to me. Again, I just want to say I appreciate the committee for the work you do. I look forward to working with you through the budget process. I agree with you that I agree with you in how we should be approaching this, and I actually the word balance is the one I use most often to describe an effective municipal budget, balancing the needs of all segments of the community while balancing out where revenue is coming from and how quickly that revenue is increasing or decreasing. So I do support what you're trying to do, and I thank you for the effort.
Thank you. Tom, would you like to?
Tom Tarpey, a member of the Finance Committee, and I think I'm going to be speaking for the Finance Committee. First of all, I want to commend you on your great presentation. I'm not certain, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think perhaps the chairman did not quite do an adequate job of describing the background of what caused us to start considering the sustainable growth rate. Those of us who've served on the Finance Committee for a number of years, and especially some of the members who have rotated off the Finance Committee, were struck by the fact that in every guidelines season, we were always telling the leaders of the budgeting entities what we wished they had done. The budget of the town is comprised, I think it's 70% or more than 70% of personnel cost. And each year during the guidelines process, when the draft budgets were presented to us, the cost of personnel was already cast in concrete. There was nothing that could be done about it. And so various members of the Finance Committee during the guidelines process said, well, really, if this is going to be a guideline, it should be a little more prospective than telling them, gee, this is what we wish you would have done. And so that is how we came up with the concept of having a more forward-looking index, the sustainable growth rate, which we would put out there as a target for the budgeting entities to look at, a direction. You're always telling your children to watch where they're going. Well, we want adults to watch where they're going too, and we especially want the budgeting entities to watch where they're going. And this applies especially to the negotiation of employment contracts and the addition of full-time employees. In the last town meeting, we voted to increase the census of full-time employees by 3%. It doesn't sound like much, but it's the gift that keeps on giving. And so, yeah, we have some improvements to do in the family of graphs that we put together. We will make them more comprehensible and more comprehensive. But I think it's important that we get across the idea that what we're trying to do is to look forward, not look back and complain, but look forward and instruct about where we would like to go.
Thank you, Tom.
Stephen.
Would you like to speak again? Come to a microphone.
So, sorry, I think you make an excellent point about personnel costs, and the municipal budget can be described in one way in two parts, fixed and flexible. And personnel costs are a good example of that. The wages and benefits are largely fixed, either by virtue of collective bargaining agreement or our compensation plan that has long been in place. The number of people working here is flexible, but that flexibility comes at a price. Increased number of benefited full-time employees yields an increased level of service for the community. A decreased number of full-time employees yields a decrease in service to the community, and that's the balancing act that we talk about. I think with regards to collective bargaining, because a lot of times wages for non-union personnel end up following the collective bargaining agreements. That's pretty standard in every community. I'm new here, but not new to this, and that's how it usually happens. And collective bargaining is relatively straightforward in that when you say look forward, in collective bargaining, it's really looking around. Because if you don't reach an agreement, you end up at arbitration. And what the arbitrator does is they look at what are other communities giving out for wage increases, other like communities. And then the decision usually gets made on those grounds and not ability to pay or many other factors. It's usually your surrounding communities, the comps is what they call them. And I'm happy to if you want to look at some communities, I'm happy to try and gather the data on what those comps are for the communities around us. But when you're negotiating employment agreements, collective bargaining agreements, what other towns are doing are really the single biggest factor in the decision making in the non-sort of management right issue. And so I don't want that really kind of key variable in that cost to be kind of lost in the analysis. So I think I do think that's something that if you want to explain to the community, that's something I think community members want to know. Like, what are wages? What are the percentage increases in wages in other communities doing? And I'm happy to help pull that together, Dean.
Triveni Upadhyay, Katrina Heights. I want to thank you guys for the Finance Committee for doing a wonderful job and a difficult job. Why it is difficult, and I'll give you the perspective like Dean said. We're very fortunate to live in a town where most of the people are very well to do. So you say, why worry about the tax, because the tax rate, on a home proportionate to your income is very small. And really, most people don't care. However, what we forget is, and I've seen that happen, is that we also have people who have fixed income. And even people who make a lot of money now, after some year when they retire, they go on fixed income and retirement, Social Security, 401k, whatever they have. So the tax burden may not be big portion of your income in the beginning, but towards the end, it becomes significant. And it may become significant to some people. Now the question is, what do we do? And I've seen data that people have left town, and this has been discussed at town meeting. People have left town, especially older people, when they're on fixed income. Now, it's a small group of people, so percentage-wise, it may not matter. But as a people, and if we want to have a diversity, that we want older people to stay in town, it's important. So How do you balance the two needs? Now, the schools want more money because you want the best schools. The town wants the best services. The roads have to be maintained. The fire station, we need police. Everything has to be supported. On the other hand, we have a problem. Now, the other problem is what I heard before, which is a valid problem, is affordable housing. Now, we need to support that too, because that's a good cause. Now, if you think about it, affordable housing means, can I afford to live in Concord with my income? And how can town help me to move in? Especially for people who work in town. That's very important. On the other hand, if you move out of town because your taxes go up. So which one is more important? People who are in town, make sure they stay, or people who can move in town, but they can't afford to move in town? Anyway, it's a very complicated issue. Thank you for addressing it. I don't think it's an easy solution. Whether the number is 2.16 or 3.16, that's not the important issue. Is what do we want as a town? Do you want to keep people on a fixed income where the tax burden could be a substantial part and they may think are forced to leave the town, versus maintaining the best schools, which everybody wants, is a top priority? So my suggestion is, Finance Committee by charter, it's an advisory committee. So, and as Tom said, that the Finance Committee is always behind because the budgets come and then people react. So it's a being reaction, we have to put a number ahead of time. My suggestion would be something we can think about is, if the Finance Committee comes up with this number, can you do a little bit early and present it at the town meeting? And have the town committees, so you have some force the town committee as a guidance. It's not a budget, it's something for the next year. But while the town committee is approving that year's budget, they can also look at this number and have some opinion. So it has a lot more force behind it. And you may want to think about that. Now, I think you did it in June and July. You'll have to do it by March for the next year. So it's a little bit extra work for Finance Committee. But I'm saying is, if this idea has to really stick, I think we need the town support. And the Finance Committee has to present it and make the case. But not make case as a budget, but as a guideline. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak? Well, I think I'm going to call for a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Second? All in favor? Aye. Thank you very much.